we're having a pop quiz, and I'm going to ask you, what is the prime muscle that creates PIP joint extension? Is that an easy question with an easy answer for you? Can you quickly bring to mind one muscle? What if I ask you to name all the muscles that contribute to PIP joint extension? Which muscles would you name? Even though, as therapists, we focus a great deal of our time on the function of the human hand, the answers to these questions are often not perfectly clear to us. Therefore, I assume that that's worthy of our time to review. So let's look at PIP joint extension and see if we can tease out some information that may be of value to us. The oblique fibers, highlighted here in blue, are the fibers that carry the power from the interosseous muscle insertions into the dorsal apparatus. If you look at this illustration, and you can appreciate that these oblique fibers end at the central slip insertion, it would be easy to say, well, that the oblique fibers extend the PIP joint. That's it. That's easy. But it is not that easy. It is far more complex because there are multiple fibers that need to relate to one another, and the transfer of power from one group of fibers to another is sort of a transitory movement. So all of the fibers in the dorsal apparatus have to move relative to one another in order to allow normal finger flexion and extension. Regardless of how powerful some fibers are for extension versus other motions, the differential movement still must be present. Now the central slip and the central slip insertion are assumed by many to be the core power for PIP joint extension. The problem with this concept, however, is the fact that one forgets that the sagittal bands, which are connected to the central slip, insert into the volar aspect of the volar aspect of the MP joint. And that insertion alone limits the distal and proximal excursion of the central slip. That means that the central slip is tethered and cannot have free excursion throughout the dorsal apparatus. So in my view, the central slip in the normal finger is not the main carrier of the power. It can be, but in the normal finger it's not. I think that will become clear as we discuss this. What this means to me is that all the dorsal apparatus fibers that are involved in PIP joint extension are always involved in PIP joint extension. Here, the red represents the central slip, the blue represents the interosseous power, and the green represents the lumbrical power. Now this is oversimplified because it's schematic, but you can see that these three muscles, the extensor digitorum communis, the interosseous, and the lumbricals, all are involved in interphalangeal joint extension, but they all must work together. If we think of the oblique fibers and their potential for PIP extension power, think of the metacarpal phalangeal joint being in full extension. And then think of this interosseous muscle contracting and pulling through these fibers. With the MP joint extended, there's a direct line of pull into the oblique fibers, and therefore, with MP joint extension, the oblique fibers are a greater contributor to PIP joint extension. Therefore, I would say that with the MP joint extended, primary muscle is most likely the interosseous, and the secondary forces for PIP joint extension would be the extensor digitorum communis and the lumbrical. This is with the metacarpophalangeal joint extended. But then let's think about the metacarpophalangeal joint being flexed. When the MP joint is flexed and there's a contraction of these muscles, the straight line of pull is through the transverse fibers and not the oblique fibers. So when the MP joint is flexed, the oblique fibers don't get as much power, and therefore the interosseous are not as dominant for interphalangeal joint extension with MP flexion. And in this position, the lumbrical becomes much more active. Now, I'd like to repeat that it's a matter of, if we'll use the word dominance, it's not a matter of all and none. It's not a matter of one muscle doing the motion and the other muscles being inactive. It is truly a matter of coordination of the muscles working together. So what I would say is when the metacarpophalangeal joint is flexed, the lumbrical becomes the primary interphalangeal joint extension force, and again the extensor digitorum communis and the interossei now are second. The position of the metacarpophalangeal joint determines which fibers are more active for PIP joint extension. So the conclusion here is that the role of the oblique fibers, and indeed the determination of which fibers are the primary source for PIP extension, is determined by the position of the MP joint. When the MP joint's extended, the oblique fibers participate more dramatically. When the MP joint is flexed, they have less of an opportunity to be dominant. Smith, in a very useful article in 1975, describes the extension of the finger by the central slip together with the oblique fibers extending the PIP joint. This is exactly what we've said. We've said that the extensor digitorum communis, or central slip, contributes to PIP extension, but when the MP joint is extended, the oblique fibers become rather primary in PIP extension. Smith went on to say that the lateral bands, which are on the lateral aspects of the finger, along with the conjoined lateral bands, and the conjoined lateral bands are the connections between the central slip to the lateral bands. Those together, with the power of the EDC contributing, extend the DIP joint. Although Smith said this, he went on to say that these always work together. In other words, we never see full PIP joint extension without the DIP joint moving in extension as well in the normal finger. Likewise, we don't see one joint flex without the other. There is this constant, steady relationship between these fibers of the dorsal apparatus that monitor the motion relationship between the PIP and DIP joint. They are interrelated. So even though this presentation talks about the PIP joint, you really cannot look at it or view it in total isolation because of this wonderful interplay or interrelationship of the anatomical structures of the dorsal apparatus.